The Achaean conquest of Crete in the 15th century BCE marked the end of the Minoan civilization and allowed the Mycenaeans to establish themselves as the dominant power of the Aegean Sea. The Mycenaean expansion continued in the following decades, reaching the western coast of Anatolia, where the former Minoan colony of Miletus became the main base of the Achaean operations in Asia Minor. The growing power of the Mycenaean civilization was felt throughout the region, and many Luwian states of Anatolia were keen to align themselves with the Achaeans. However, not everybody was happy with the newly developed situation, and the Achaeans would soon come into conflict with another expansionist state and a great power of the Bronze Age, the Hittite Empire. In this video, we will talk about the Achaean-Hittite conflict of the end of the 15th and the beginning of the 14th century BCE and the everlasting battle for the control of western Anatolia. The 15th century BCE saw great expansion of the Achaean influence throughout the region. Crete was now subdued, with Knossos becoming the major city within the proto-confederation of the Mycenaean palace centers. In Argos, Tiryns emerged as an important palace with large Cyclopean fortifications. This was attributed to Proetus and Acrisius, sons and successors of celebrated King Abbas. At first, the brothers were meant to rule jointly, but as it often happens, the struggle for power soon followed, with Acrisius expelling his brother from the kingdom. Proetus, however, would soon return, aided by his Lycian allies from Asia Minor, triggering a brief civil conflict. The whole situation was soon resolved with the mediation of the religious officials. Proetus was appointed the ruler of Tiryns, while Acrisius kept direct control over the rest of Argos, presumably as the senior king. The coastal city of Miletus was among the Minoan colonies of Anatolia that fell into Achaean influence during or shortly after the Achaean conquest of Crete. The surrounding area belonged to a number of Luwian city kingdoms, while the central and eastern Anatolia was dominated by the expansionist Hittite Empire. The Hittites, or Hatti, had a long history of hegemony throughout Anatolia and competition with other great powers of the Bronze Age, such as Babylon, which was sacked by the Hittites a century before. After a century of instability, King Tudhaliya managed to revive the Hittite power, defeating the kingdoms of Mitanni and Aleppo to the east and expanding into the Luwian territory to the west. The Luwian kingdoms were organized into the Asuwa League, which was considered to be the origin of the word Asia. It was a confederation of 22 cities, sponsored and supported by the Achaeans in order to contain the growing power of the Hittites. The Luwians, however, were no match for King Tudhaliya, who marched west with his army and defeated the confederation. As the result, the Asuwa League was disbanded and broken into a number of smaller states, many of which becoming Hittite vassals and allies. Notable exception to this was the kingdom of Arzawa, ruled by a person named Kupanta-Kurunta, a close ally of the Achaeans and a fierce enemy to the Hittites. The kingdom of Arzawa served as a sort of a buffer state between the Achaean and Hittite kingdoms, with both powers showing ambition to become the hegemons over this area. The disproportional Hittite influence in the region after the disintegration of the Asoan Confederation was unacceptable to the Achaeans, and a large expedition was assembled under Atreas, eventually triggering the first direct military conflict between Achaeans and the Hittite Empire. Atreas, not to be confused with King Atreas, the father of Agamemnon, was in Hittite rendering called Attarsiya and was described as an Achaean ruler, but notably without a title of a king. Either way, it's clear that he had a high status among the Achaeans, possibly the title of Lawagetas. Being a very skilled military commander, Atreas moved from the Achaean base in Miletus into Arzawa, where he ensured the support from the ruler Kupanta-Kurunta and prepared for the invasion of Lycia, the same country that had meddled into the Argive civil war a few years before. Madduwatta, or in Greek rendering Madyattes, was the most powerful Lycian ruler in what was notoriously a lawless land. Lycians were known for banditry, piracy and seafaring, but could by no means stand a full-fledged Achaean assault. The Achaean army under Atreas invaded and soundly defeated Madyattes, who decided to flee the country, finding exile at the court of the Hittite king Tudhaliya. Tudhaliya accepted Madyattes and after making him swear an oath of vassalage, installed him as a ruler of the Zippasla or Zippasla land, a mountain kingdom to the border to Arzawa, tributary to the Hittites. On the other side, the land of Arzawa was heavily supported by the Achaeans. Kupanta-Kurunta was a trusted ally, and it was in the Achaean best interest to keep the anti-Hittite states in Anatolia as strong as possible. Madyattes, despite now officially being a Hittite vassal, was an ambitious warlord that looked for ways to establish himself as a powerful figure in the region. Acting without explicit Hittite orders, Madyattes invaded the territory of Arzawa, but was decisively defeated by the Arzawan army. Madyattes himself managed to survive and fled once again to Hittite territory, leaving an open road to the Zippasla land. Kupanta-Kurunta, backed by Atreas, continued forward into Zippasla unopposed and occupied the Hittite vassal land with his army. This enraged the Hittite king, who saw his reputation greatly damaged and once more had to save Madyattes for almost certain death. Tudhaliya dispatched a major army and marched west in order to directly confront the Arzawans occupying Zippasla. Arzawan army, although strong and well-trained, was no match for the Hittites, and after a short battle of Zippasla, Kupanta-Kurunta was forced to withdraw back to his kingdom. The Hittites decide not to pursue, instead reinstalling Madyattes as a ruler of Zippasla and returned back to the land of Hatti. Achaeans and their allies Arzawans perceived this Hittite move as a weakness, which indicated that Hatti did not have the confidence to directly attack Arzawa. Atreas now decided that he himself would make another move and directly attack Madyattes once again. Madyattes, who was already in a weak position and without a strong army, stood no chance in a war against Achaeans. As soon as Atreas invaded the Zippasla territory, Madyattes fled to the Hittite land for the third time. He justified his actions as not having enough protection against a superior enemy and asked the Hittite king for a direct involvement. Tudhaliya now had no choice but to face the Achaeans directly for the first time. The Hittite imperial army was dispatched under General Kisnapili, Hittites' best military commander, eager to take on the Achaeans and establish hegemony over the western Anatolia. Atreas himself was happy to oblige, and the Achaean and Hittite armies openly met on the field of battle for the very first time. Although the Achaean warriors were highly reputed and considered unmatched on the battlefield, the Hittite war chariots were the most advanced of their time and numerically superior to their Achaean counterparts. Under fierce pressure from the Hittites, Atreas did not want to risk a disaster and decided to retreat. Although Kisnapili was not able to destroy the Achaean army, that enabled him to capture Zippasla, and the news of victory were sent to Hattusa. Atreas, although forced to withdraw from Zippasla, still managed to use the situation to his strategical advantage. It was still the Achaeans who had stable and relatively powerful ally in the region, while Hittites had a number of weak allies and client states and were forced to intervene each time some of their clients got into trouble. While Kisnapili was still contemplating his next move from the recaptured Zippasla, the Achaeans were still on a small-scale campaign in Lycia, where they managed to secure support from the cities of Tlos and Hinduwas, which now openly declare war on the Hittites. Kisnapili quickly decided to move south and squash the new Lycian enemies. He was aided by Madyattes, who as a former ruler in Lycia was urging the Hittite general to intervene as quickly as possible. Thus the Hittite army moved into Lycia and marched towards the city of Tlos. However, what Kisnapili wasn't aware of was that Madyattes had actually betrayed him, switching to the side of Tlos and revealing Hittite positions to the enemy. Before reaching the city, the Hittite army fell into an ambush and was completely destroyed. Kisnapili himself was killed, and the whole Hittite campaign in the western Anatolia met a disastrous ending. This betrayal would later be attested in great detail in a Hittite document known as the Indictment of Madduwatta, but it was now clear that the Hittites were for a time no longer able to project significant military power in western Anatolia and had to resort to diplomacy. Madyattes would be greatly rewarded by the Achaeans and Arzawans, while continuing to have relations with the Hittite king Tudhaliya and later his successor Arnuwanda, but that's something that we will talk about in one of the next episodes. Please consider subscribing and sharing this video, as this is a one-person production and it greatly helps the visibility of the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. This was WanaxTV, and we will see you again soon.